Today, we are tackling a pretty fascinating figure, Frank Lloyd Wright, the renowned architect. And the source we'll be looking at is his book, When Democracy Builds, specifically the revised edition, which was published in 1945.
Okay.
So right at the, kind of the cusp of the post-war world. This edition explores this really interesting connection between democracy, architecture, and how societies thrive in this new machine age that was emerging.
Yeah, a really crucial moment in history to be reflecting on those themes.
So our mission today is to really extract, the core arguments that Wright's making in this book.
Okay.
We want to understand how he saw American society at that time, and maybe even more importantly, how he envisioned a democratic future.
Right.
And how that future would be reflected in, the physical and cultural landscapes that we inhabit. So, When Democracy Builds, even just glancing at the table of contents, it's clear that Wright covers a lot of territory here.
It's a pretty ambitious scope.
He touches on, our place on Earth, what he saw as the kind of social and economic diseases of the time, the role of individuality in a democracy, and then these big concepts like centralization, decentralization, the impact of the machine age, and of course, his own vision, his Usonian vision, right?
Yes, exactly.
So to start unpacking all of this, one of the first things that jumps out is Wright's pretty scathing take on what he calls the properly citified citizen.
Yeah.
He doesn't paint a very flattering picture here, does he?
No, not at all. I think the core insight here is that Wright believed that modern society was encouraging these sort of detached, unproductive roles. And that was his citified citizen. This is someone who's cut off from the natural world, from real creation, and driven by this sort of, vicarious power as a, broker, a vendor of gadgetry, or a speculator, he says. And he even uses some pretty strong language to describe them, calling them a parasite of the spirit in a whirling vortex.
Right. It's a powerful and quite critical image.
Yeah.
And he doesn't just limit this to individuals, right?
Yeah.
He extends this kind of critique to institutions like schools, for example.
Absolutely. He has a very, he feels very strongly about over-centralization.
Mm-hmm.
And he uses this analogy of schools as factories, systematically turning out herd-struck morons as machinery turns out shoes, which is, that's a pretty harsh analogy. Makes you wonder if he saw any redeeming qualities in the education system of the time, or if it's just purely a critique of this sort of dominant, centralized approach.
Yeah. And it's interesting how he places all of this in this kind of historical context.
Right.
With the cave dweller versus the nomad.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
What's going on with that comparison? Why is he bringing that up?
Yeah, I think it's a way to really get at this basic tension between settled societies and this kind of human desire for freedom. So the cave dweller who sort of needs fortifications and a permanent home, he sees as representative of more statist ways of thinking.
Okay.
Whereas the nomad, who's constantly on the move, is self-reliant, embodies the ideal of freedom that he believes is always kind of pushing up against these static establishments, and eventually leads to the idea of the Democrat.
So for Wright, this increasing reliance that we have on machines, especially in this centralized way, he's suggesting that actually makes us weaker at a very fundamental level.
I think so, yeah. He argues that by substituting artificial machine power for human power, we're actually moving towards ultimate impotence where creation is concerned, which is...
Yeah, it's a bold statement.
It is.
Yeah.
It's basically saying that, that ability to be creative, to shape our lives, shape our surroundings, is being eroded.
Yeah.
Because we're too reliant on these external mechanical forces.
Yeah. And he goes on to outline what he calls these three major economic artificialities,
right?
That he thinks have been grafted onto our economic system.
These are crucial for understanding his critique of economics.
So what are they all about?
So the first one is interest, which is the idea that money itself can generate more money just by existing,
right?
Which he sees as ultimately rendering actual work kind of pointless. The second is fortune, which is created through this interest and leads to what he calls armies of white-collarites who are, essentially managing this artificial growth instead of producing any real value. And then the third one is the misplacement of machine profits due to capitalist centralization, which he calls this triumph of rugged individualism.
Right.
And his point there is that the benefits of technology accrue mostly to a select few, rather than being distributed to everybody whose lives are affected by it.
Right. So the core takeaway here is that he believes these financial constructs are actually undermining real productivity and creating a system that's based on illusion rather than, tangible worth.
Exactly.
And he argues that the consequence of these artificialities is this growing need for more and more laws.
Right, because to keep this concentration of wealth and these unnatural economic structures going, more and more rules are necessary to sort of, dovetail together smoothly, he says. But his concern is that this leads to this widening gap between what's legal and what's ethical.
Right.
And that weakens the moral foundation of society.
Yeah. And this all builds up to his concept of centripetal centralization as this kind of unstoppable destructive force. It sounds pretty worrying.
It is. He sees it as creating this kind of, this forced, unhealthy flow in cities.
Okay.
He compares it to like high blood pressure in the body.
Okay.
This constant drive to pack people and resources into these urban centers, driven by this economic model that he sees as being so flawed, is just fundamentally unhealthy.
Yeah.
And he asked this really kind of important question: what benign power can ever check centralization, thus a destructive fixation? So you can really, see how deeply concerned he was about where this kind of urban development was heading.
Yeah. It's like almost like a drain that's pulling everything toward a single point with ever increasing force. And that's how he sees, the city.
It is. It's this concentration of resources and people to an unhealthy degree.
Okay. So shifting gears a little bit, Wright also takes aim at what he calls pseudoculture.
Right.
So what is it that he finds so problematic about this pseudoculture?
Yeah, so he's arguing that American culture developed so rapidly, it kind of outpaced its own original indigenous roots.
Okay.
Which led to a situation where ready-made art and pseudo-classic architecture, basically styles borrowed from Europe, became these commercial necessities, driven by this desire to quickly appear cultured.
So culture itself, in this sense, just becomes another commodity.
Exactly, yeah. He says that culture, thus taken over ready-made, became more and more a commodity. And what's really striking is that he says that to actually talk about artistic principles was peculiarly offensive now to academic education. So the focus was on these readily available, commercially successful styles rather than any kind of real artistic integrity.
Yeah.
And he saw early American culture as this curious, borrowed, bastardized collection of styles, a kind of a temporary fix that we should have moved beyond.
Right. Okay, so having established this critique, this kind of inauthentic culture,
right.
Wright really pivots to what he sees as this fundamental building block, right, for a healthy society and a healthy democracy.
Yeah.
And that's individuality. He even calls democracy the gospel of individuality.
Yeah.
So what does he really mean by that? When he says individuality, what is he getting at?
Yeah, so for Wright, individuality is much more than just, having your own preferences or something. Okay. He defines it as organic spirituality and simple integrity of character.
Okay.
Which is, I think it's his way of describing a kind of inherent connection to one's own creative potential and to the natural world, which he felt was being, stifled by this increasingly industrialized society. So it's about, the fundamental worth and unique potential of every single person.
And he's careful to distinguish this from just like pure egotism or selfishness.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
He sees that that rugged individualism. We often talk about in the context of capitalism as an example of selfishness run wild.
Right.
A way of exploiting others rather than expressing this true individuality. So for him, real individuality is based on this kind of fundamental human honesty and completeness.
So why is this elemental individuality, as he calls it, so vital for a healthy democracy?
Because according to Wright, you can't have great art or poetry or religion, the highest forms of human expression, without this base of individual integrity. He even says that To violate the conscience of the citizen is to kill democracy at its very source.
Yeah.
So the freedom to think and act according to your own deeply held beliefs is absolutely essential.
And this leads us to his idea of the obsolete city. He sees these, the old urban centers as fundamentally outdated.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Primarily because the rise of what he calls standardized mechanization and increased mobility, particularly the automobile. Yeah. So for the densely packed centralized city no longer makes sense with these new realities.
Yeah.
And he compares it to an inadequate old building that we're still, using just because we haven't fully embraced these new possibilities.
Yeah, yeah. And he has some pretty strong opinions about the skyscraper, that iconic symbol of the modern city, right? Yeah. What does he make of that?
Well, he sees it as a symbol of selfish exploitation and a monument to cultural lag, he says.
Okay.
Which is driven by a misunderstanding of what democratic freedom really means. He has this really powerful image of the citified citizen mistaking the skyscraper's shadow for their own greatness.
Right.
Completely missing how impersonal and dehumanizing it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, he does find some appeal in the city at night, doesn't he?
He does, yeah. He describes the city at night as having these myriad haphazard beauties with its lights and reflections.
Yeah.
Which can be romantic and visually appealing. But he contrasts that really sharply with the daytime reality, which he sees as being full of these sordid reiterations and an overpowering sense of the cell.
Okay.
So he's really highlighting those dehumanizing aspects of the crowded urban environment, during the day.
And with more and more cars on the road, he also predicted some pretty serious traffic problems.
Absolutely. He wonders if dutiful devotion in the machine age will lead to comparative flight, which maybe he was thinking of, like personal aircraft or something.
Right.
Or if it will just turn us into morons for citizens who are stuck in these never-ending traffic jams.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty remarkable how accurate some of his predictions were, considering the kind of daily commutes that we have today.
He recognized very early on just how much personal vehicles would change things and how unprepared our cities were for that change.
Right. But amidst all this, kind of criticism and, a bit of pessimism, perhaps, Wright also sees these forces that he believes are naturally pushing towards decentralization.
Yeah.
So what are those? What are those forces?
So one of the key ones that he identifies is a gradual reawakening of slumbering primitive instincts of the wandering tribe, he said, which is that basic human desire for freedom, for movement, that he believes will naturally push back against the static nature of what he calls the feudal city.
Okay. And technology itself, he sees as playing a role in this shift as well, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
He sees these advancements like electrification and the ability to transmit voice, vision, and movement across distances as inherently forces that work against the concentrated city.
Okay.
So in his view, these technologies make the dense, crowded city increasingly unnecessary and even undesirable.
Right.
So there's no need to be packed together anymore. Yeah. Yeah, and this leads to his concept of a planned revolution by evolution towards decentralization. It's a pretty interesting idea.
It is.
What's he getting at there?
So he envisions this deliberate shift driven by this new understanding of space and by the the spiritual strength of the democratic ideal.
Right.
He contrasts the way that modern cities grow, which he sees as this kind of parasitic way, with the more integrated nature of cities in the past.
Okay.
So suggesting a move towards this more balanced relationship between human settlements and the natural world around them.
Right. And this is where his Usonian vision, and specifically Broadacre City, kind of comes into focus, right?
Yes, exactly.
So what does that look like? Can you paint us a picture of what Broadacre City would be?
Yeah. So Broadacre City is his idea of a free city that is a nation.
Okay.
Which is a completely different way of thinking about how we live and organize ourselves.
Right. So architecturally, buildings would fit naturally into the landscape. Mm-hmm. Each one would be unique and connected to its surroundings.
Okay.
It's all about, he says, endless unity and variety, and a character that's specific to the place.
So a much more, I guess, spread out kind of urban environment.
Definitely, yeah. He imagines, individual homes, each on their own acre of land, integrated with small farms, workshops, community buildings, all connected by, this kind of smoothly flowing traffic on what used to be railroad lines, and even areas for small aircraft.
Wow.
So the goal is for people to be relatively self-sufficient within a small area, maybe 10 to 20 miles from their home.
And this connection between the house and the land is really important, isn't it?
That's absolutely central.
Yeah.
He sees the home as an outdoor garden and the garden as an outdoor home. So really blurring those lines between indoor and outdoor living. He also emphasizes using these modern materials like steel and glass, to create these homes that are full of light and open space.
What about taller buildings?
Yeah.
Do they have a place in the Broadacre City vision?
He suggests that they could exist, but they would stand alone in green spaces, and they would maybe be these cooperative apartment buildings for people who are transitioning from a more urban way of life.
So, I mean, how would things like shopping, for example, or, just general community life work in this kind of spread out city?
So he envisions a much more direct way of getting goods, cutting out these unnecessary middlemen. Professionals, like doctors, for example, would have their offices close to where they live. He sees the roadside market, being transformed into this daylight store and country fair. That would provide opportunities for, local people to build and trade. He also sees banks becoming more like public services, working with the government to provide credit for production rather than focusing on, the speculative value of money.
Right.
Community centers would be, these lively places for art, music, movies, free from commercial or political control.
And I imagine the education system in this Broadacre City would be quite different as well.
Yeah, completely transformed. Yeah. He proposes these smaller schools that are integrated with nature, designed to nurture individuality and connect students with practical industries through these style centers that he talks about. So the focus would be on hands-on learning and developing individual talents rather than just memorizing facts. And even farming, what he calls the Usonian farm, would be part of this free city, benefiting from modern conveniences and direct access to consumers.
So ultimately, what is Wright's message here? What's his call to action for the Usonians, as he puts it?
So he's urging them to realize that their pioneering spirit is still needed. It's just that the frontier has moved from, conquering land to overcoming what he calls sordid, ugly commercialism. So to achieve this democratic vision, they need to, challenge established interests and embrace this new idea of success where, technology helps to free people rather than control them.
And he really believed that this free city, this Broadacre City, was something that could actually be realized.
He did. He saw it not just as a nice idea, but as a feasible, practical ideal already in process of becoming. Mm-hmm. He believed that that true wealth came from, a refined human sensibility, not from having lots of material things, and that well-designed homes would contribute to a better society for everybody.
And he finishes by highlighting, the Usonian homemaker as someone who kind of instinctively understands these high ideals. So what's so important about that figure?
So he sees this person as key to making the Usonian vision a reality. Okay. Someone who values, genuine quality, freedom, and community, and who wants those same opportunities for others.
Yeah. He
emphasizes this new sense of space, freedom, and belonging that this vision offers, and it leads to a deeper, more natural understanding of democracy as this kind of integrated way of life. He really stresses those words: organic, integration, and democracy.
It's clear from our deep dive that Frank Lloyd Wright was offering, this really powerful critique of the centralized, commercialized society of his time, and his vision of a decentralized, individual-centric, democratic future as embodied in the Usonian landscape. I mean, it's truly compelling.
And it's remarkable how relevant Wright's perspective from 1945, still feels to a lot of the conversations we're having today.
Absolutely.
About, how we plan our cities, the role of technology in our lives, and what individual freedom really means in this complex world that we live in. His concerns about the potential for unchecked centralization to be dehumanizing and the importance of individual agency. I mean, these feel incredibly insightful, even now.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's a final thought for you to consider. How does Wright's idea of this kind of seamless integration of nature, technology, and individual freedom compare to the challenges and the possibilities that we face in creating a thriving and equitable society today? We encourage you to think about those organic connections in your own life, in your own community, and how those might contribute to a more democratic future.